People who quit their jobs on the spot, what happened?
At last minute, owner/manager/CEO dictator revoked my Christmas leave. My wife was terminally ill, my daughter was about to move off to college, and it would be our last Christmas together, ever again. It's the only time in my life I've ever said, F you, to a boss's face.
I was working for a major video game company back in 2003. We were in crunch time, working from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. 6 days a week. Right before lunch, our supervisor walks in and says, "Good news everyone, we get to come in on Sundays now, but it's only a half day." The moment he was done with his speech, I walked over to his desk and told him I was quitting immediately. He warned me that I would never work in the game industry again. I didn't give a proper 2 weeks, I told him that was fine and finished my day. I ended up working in the industry for another 3 years until I freaked out and quit for good. Never again.
I got told I wouldn't be getting a raise because I asked for the raise. But apparently, if I hadn't asked, I would have gotten it. My boss then said I was on the shit list of the higher boss for asking, and that I wouldn't get a raise for at least a few months. Yeah, I quit right there, lol.
Head mechanic at a small but busy bicycle shop. Been there 5 years or so with no raises other than promised, soon. Owner showed up with a nice new car and started the same old spell about there not being enough money to offer a raise of any sort. Told him to get effed, walked out and down to the main competitor down the road. Better pay and better place to work. Once word got out I was there, a lot of the clientele followed me there. Old place was out of business in 9 months or so.
Newly in the field in my own, early 20s and no prior experience being up high on ladders. Believe it was my 3rd day out. Cable install tech. Got to the site and it was a mid-span drop, meaning along the wire on the pole, midway between poles. And right in the way were trees and bushes, making it next to impossible for me to get the ladder correctly positioned. I tried for a good while and then called dispatch. They complained about my complaint, and basically told me to suck it up and figure it out. So I tried again, getting the ladder hooked but nearly vertical. I got the best angle I could on it and climbed up a couple of rungs, but the ladder tipped back. A few more repositions later and now I have the ladder against a tree, but there's limbs and bushes poking through the rungs. I start to climb and maybe 4 or 5 rungs up the whole ladder shifts sideways and I nearly went tumbling. Called dispatch and they more or less told me I was to stay there until I had the job done. So instead I packed everything up, told the customer I couldn't help them, and went back to the warehouse, dropped all the equipment and cable boxes and such that I had, and left. Didn't even say a word to anyone there.
I had a verbal agreement with my manager that she'd reduce my hours so I could continue working during the school year. She put me on for 40 hours per week on the first school time schedule. I spoke to her about it and reminded her of her word. She stonewalled and denied everything. I apologized and walked out of her office. I graduated and got a good job writing software. 30 years later Kmart no longer exists. F you Beth.
Had a supervisor who was really unprofessional and disrespectful. When I turned in my 2 weeks I also left a personal note for my manager telling them exactly why I was quitting, and that I refused to work any more shifts with the supervisor during my exit period. First week was fine, but I walked in one day and there was supervisor. Gave them a chance but they quickly pulled some crap, so I walked out and skipped my remaining shifts. No spectacle, but I'm still proud that I stood up for myself.
I've done it twice. First time, district manager at Applebee's decided that my request off for a school competition that I had put in months earlier and had been approved already was just not gonna work anymore, and changed the schedule without telling me. I didn't come in because I didn't know. Then, like 2 months later, my mom called in for me because I was projectile puking from flu or food poisoning and he yelled at her. As soon as I could walk without barfing, I took my uniform in, handed it to him, and left. Second time, I was working at a daycare while looking for work as a teacher. The daycare charged by the hour, so they only got money if the kids were there. They wouldn't call parents if the kids were sick or had fevers. One day, I was left in a room by myself with 9 infants. No break. Not only is that illegal, it is super dangerous. I called her after relief showed up and quit.
Oh. Maybe my favorite ever story to tell, though it's not very dramatic. I used to get mini panic attacks on Thursdays in sort of a, I can't believe this is what I'm doing with my life, kind of way. And I'd chill out by going to the vending machine or getting a drink of water and remembering the next day was the last of the week. Then one day I started feeling this way hard on a Wednesday. I started adding up all my assets in my head and figuring out how long I could go without a job. I cleaned my workstation, packed up my things, went to the office and said to the supervisor, I think I have to quit. The night office lady cried and hugged me. I was on third shift and quit in the middle around 2 a.m. or so. I'd been there 8.5 years. The de facto human resources woman, who knew I had been unhappy for a while, put a few extra vacation days on my last paycheck.
Spent a year fixing things, hired a team, the system started generating real P&L, profit and loss, the boss who effed everything up started to re-engage as the situation turned around, making stupid suggestions a burning valuable time. We had a meeting where he was going on and I remarked that it was counterproductive. He calls me after the meeting and says, "What the F was that?" I responded that it was becoming unpleasant, with the meetings and change of course. He said, "If you don't like it, leave," and I said, "Okay," and walked out. Everyone stood there shocked as I left. Fast forward a year later and everything was effed up again.
I took over a piece of a project that was in bad shape. The customer's PM was running that part of the project, and he was a jackass, so no one engaged with him and as a result we didn't have the info we needed in a very fast-paced project. Think, where do I put my field crews tomorrow kind of pace. When I took it over I had 2 calls a day, morning and afternoon, they started on time and went very very quickly. My guys would jump on the call, give me 3 pieces of info for the day for each job site, I'd thank them and they'd jump off. I kept the chit-chat to a bare minimum. I thanked them for the work they were doing. I was getting 99% engagement and getting exactly the info we needed to move our crews for the following day. The calls got downright cheerful. So of course the jackass had to pull rank and take the calls back over. And he used it as a pulpit to hear his own voice, and to badmouth my field guys, and generally be a jerk. The calls went from 10 to 15 minutes to 40 minutes. I didn't quit because I was just moved to another project, but several of the field guys walked.
Dumbasses were exploding acetylene gas for yucks and the owner of the company thought it was cool. I quit on the spot. Addendum, the owner of the company was given it by his dad on his 18th birthday, and his dad took the company back after a few months.
My boss said something extremely rude to me while I was trying to talk to him about my cross-training for another position. I happened to be wearing a company shirt with a tank underneath. I began unbuttoning the shirt and thanking him for the opportunity and then telling him to never speak to me like that while raising my voice and finishing with a hearty "F this job and F you too," as I threw my shirt at him. I walked outside with my stuff and a woman who worked down the hall came running outside and talked with me. We became friends and ended up living together a couple times. It's been almost 20 years and I'm going to visit her. I moved away, and go to a concert in 2 weeks.
I worked for a photographer, and we were on a tight deadline schedule. Most of the office had been let go for the summer, so it was just me, the head of my department, one coworker, and the owner. I come in to discover the owner left town with his family on vacation. I hit my breaking point. I put my letter of resignation on his desk while he was gone. My only coworker left with me. The owner had no idea what had happened until he returned home to the letter, undone work on the counter, and 0 employees.
My manager was intentionally trying to sabotage me and write me up for BS things, because I challenged her at times. I was the assistant manager. Didn't want to get fired, so I just told her I'm done and walked out.
Dude, same. I was a housekeeper at the time, and the new owners of the caravan park I worked at started making up complaints to if I know what they wanted to achieve. One afternoon the owners walked into the break room and tore us a new asshole about a bunch of shit we didn't even do/couldn't help. I damn near got into a fist fight with one of them. Then he used the old, "If you don't like it, there's the door." Needless to say, I walked out. Thank God I did leave, because it turned out that my cat I'd had for 16 years only had 2 months left. I'm so grateful I got to be home with him for that last couple of months.
I was denied promotion for the 3rd time in 4 years. Always great performance reviews. Max score. Example to others. First time it was too soon, as I only been in the company for 10 months, but of those 10, 5 were a complete crisis where management gave up/burned out and I had to save the dat. Second time the acting manager convinced his buddy to run for promotion as well so he could pick him, but I was made high potential, without any benefits or raise or projects or training. Third time they didn't even post the job internally. When I asked for a reason, I was called into the HR manager, who said, "You stayed at home for 2 weeks in the first COVID lockdown," which showed lack of commitment. I was working an extra day on overtime for 3 years on that point. At least 20 days a year. I told her I would be taking up all my paid overtime and send in my resignation at the end of the day, and that I will also be requesting a formal exit conversation with the VP. He knew me from my first year when I had to save the ship. Shit hit the fan real fast after that.
Would love to know the follow-up on how it affected the company.
I did my exit interview, and the gist of it was that I felt underappreciated and that there were 2 very capable managers that I believe should be in more key roles for the future success of the company, while the then current operations and HR manager were not doing their job correctly. Some managers tried to talk me out of it, but I made up my mind. I was instantly also headhunted for a similar job in another company and negotiated a plus €1,000 monthly increase in my net wage. I left, and after a couple of months the HR manager got sacked. A couple months later the operations manager had the same fate. The 2 very capable managers were put in the key roles I suggested. I organized a guided tour for some of my current colleagues last week to my old company to show some what they are doing, as I know they are ahead in certain areas where we are just beginning. Both the 2 decent managers arranged so the tour could happen, and they guided us. It was fun to see my old workplace again and my 2 old bosses. They are now doing really well, and so is the company. I was just unlucky that 2 very uncapable people had their positions in the time, or I would have had a nice career there.
This job I worked at years ago had a habit of telling people, "Oh, there's no work at the moment, have a few days off and we'll let you know when to come back," then just never call people back, because they didn't want to have to actually fire the person. They did it to me after a job got messed up when I was following my supervisor's directions. I asked him multiple times, "Are you sure? Thing we don't want will likely happen if we do it," and he kept telling me to. Then when the customer complained, he suddenly blamed it on me. The next day they pulled the, "Hey, there's no work right now" thing. Except they did actually call me back the next week when they realized nobody else knew how to do my job and they were floundering. I came into my office to find it a mess, and this guy I got along with came in and was surprised to see me there. Told me how management said they let me go, and had him doing my job, but he had no idea what to do. I was pretty pissed then, so I walked to the office, handed over my high-vis vest and walked out. The manager was being really arrogant. Then about 5 minutes later, as I was driving away, she realized they still had nobody who knew how to do my job and started spam calling me. When I wouldn't answer, she started texting me begging me to call her back to work this out. F that place. Never went back. Also about 6 months later that manager was fired. A year after that the company was bought out.
I was a lifeguard at an indoor pool. At the same pool I had started as a swim teacher, which was kind of a private contractor type deal. It was less hours, but I made about 400% more per hour, so I was already planning to quit my lifeguarding job. The boss didn't like the way I did something, and so he told me I had to spend the rest of my shift in the warm pool where the temperature of the room was about 90 degrees and very humid. We normally rotated out every 30 minutes. I stayed in there for an hour, then went back into the regular rotation, hoping he'd forget. He saw me and said, "If you don't get in there right now, you can go home." I just said, "Alright, you want me to come back tomorrow?" When my next shift was. "If you're walking out the door, don't ever come back," was his reply. I said, "Cool," and handed him my rescue buoy and left. I had a leisurely lunch and then showed back up 2 hours later when my lifeguarding shift would have ended because I scheduled some lessons at that time and walked right past him saying hi on the way into the pool. He was furious, but because I was technically a private contractor in that position which fell under a different manager's purview, he couldn't do anything about it. I'm pretty sure he thought I was effectively quitting or threatening to quit entirely. Anyway, we eventually ended up getting along okay after that. Hope you're doing well, Rodney.
I was told when I was hired that I would be on probation for a year and then I would get full benefits. I made it clear when they hired me that I had a 2-week honeymoon I was going on and gave them the dates I would be gone. I worked that job for 9 months, and then when my honeymoon came around they informed me that 2 straight weeks off wasn't possible and that they had to fire me and rehire me, and then I'd be on probation and earning less without full benefits for another year. I walked into back offices where the assistant managers and the general manager were and started yelling. The general manager started yelling back at me that they weren't going to change the rules for me. I had a performance review at 6 months into the job and I got an excellent review. I yelled at the dude and threatened to sue him. Then I told him how small he was 6 feet 7 inches, in height, but I meant as a person. I told him he could shove the job up his ass and walked out. I don't regret it.
The manager had me do training on a computer, but forgot they locked the door. I was stuck inside a room for hours, I think 4 hours, and for the first time, I started having a panic attack due to claustrophobia. I remember screaming for help, even opening the window from the second floor for that. Sadly, it was in the middle of winter and was snowing a lot, so nobody were just standing outside. I even debated jumping off the window, was still pretty high. When they finally came back and unlocked the door, they laughed, and acted as if nothing happened. I regretted not quitting immediately, but went through the day of work to seem professional. When I got home the next day, I cried a lot for calling up and saying I don't want the job. I felt disappointed in myself, but also the workplace genuinely scarred me for a bit just in that moment.
I was a floor nurse at the time. My boss promised me that if I worked Thanksgiving Eve and Thanksgiving Day, Halloween Eve and Halloween Day, and Christmas Eve and Christmas Day that I could have New Year's Eve and New Year's Day off, my favorite holiday. I agreed and did it, the Halloweens, and the Thanksgiving dates. Out of nowhere, she revoked that promise like the first week of December, saying we all needed to be part of a team and that she couldn't honor that promise, and that I was expected to work Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. I didn't quit on the spot, but I gave a week's notice 2 days later that I'm leaving. I didn't cover Christmas/Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Her effing face was priceless. She was like, "I cannot believe you're doing this to me at a busy time like this." Last thing I heard about her is that a lot of the nurses ended up leaving and she is no longer a manager, she is a simple floor nurse herself now. She was airing crazy, she wouldn't even allow us to drink coffee. She took away our coffee maker, saying it's unhygienic to have this in a hospital. Not even the nurses' lounge. Effing crazy.
I worked at a factory that made cakes. It was a fast-paced workplace, and throughout the day you'd get switched to a different station. I was eventually put at the oven station where I had to keep shoving trays of cake into a commercial oven. The trays were slightly hot and all they gave me was a vinyl glove. After 30 minutes of shoving hot trays into the oven I had a blister. There was no lead around, so I talked with another coworker who seemed to know one of the lead. That coworker gave me another extra pair of vinyl glove. I shoved trays for a few minutes and walked out.
I was hired as a manager of a warehouse, first time being a manager. The first thing I was told was to create structure, and to find the two most useless people to terminate and replace. Well, to create structure, I very quickly found out that no one had a valid forklift license, all health and safety and OSHA stuff was outdated by 6+ years, and none of the forklifts had their annual inspections done. To top it off, there was zero record of anyone doing a daily forklift inspection. Where I am, it's a requirement 100% at the beginning of the shift or when someone else starts to operate that lift truck. I was also asked to find cheaper suppliers for warehouse-related stuff. What is my budget? I asked. There isn't one, just find cheaper. 2 employees were identified, which wasn't hard, because they just chose to show up when they felt like it. I tried to terminate, my boss wouldn't let me. The forklift licenses? He refused to bring in a trainer. He wouldn't allow me to order things from any other company. Why? No idea. The annual inspections? Too expensive. And then people started refusing to train me, which I didn't realize until after all this, but told my boss they did and that I wasn't picking it up. And then the sabotaging of my work started and orders started to get picked up, which we then got fined $1,000 plus because they weren't supposed to go out until 3 weeks later. All of this was over the course of 2 months. I spent 6 months being unemployed between this job and the previous one where the company went under. Told my GF I can't take this crap anymore and that the legal repercussions I could face if someone were to get hurt are far too high to risk this anymore. So decided I was going to resign first thing the next morning, which she supported. I arrived to work 30 minutes early, grabbed all my stuff, put it in my car, and who walks in but the complete bitch that made my life hell in that place, starts screaming at me in front of all the staff about how I sent an order out 3 weeks early, and I reminded her that she forgot that she CC'd me on an email where she told that customer to pick the order up and that she could F right off. Got up, started walking to my boss's office, and as I was walking in ready to tell him to F right off and that I was done, he terminated me. Which funny enough for them worked out better for me because I got the unemployment back for the next 6 months. On my way out, pretty pissed off, I announced to the staff on the floor that when I was hired, my first day I was told to find 2 of you to terminate first, so take that for what it is and how the company values you. Fast forward 8 months later, I've finally found a new job, and found out that about a week ago at that company I was just talking about, someone fell off a forklift at a higher elevation and broke their pelvis and were now facing a massive lawsuit as well as huge fines as well. Good riddance.